It's a truth universally acknowledged that if you think you're done and ready for a LARP event, you've forgotten something. And in my case, I had completely and totally forgotten that my dress had no pockets. So the night before, I embarked on the somewhat ambitious project of making sure I had somewhere to put my phone. This is basically all I had left of the fabric my dress was made of. I had some red linen in the same weight, and this white cotton, which I ended up not using. The first thing I'm doing here is trimming down the pieces I have so that they're all roughly rectangular. Rectangular shapes are just easier to fit together. The fabric will distort much less if you are piecing together along straight lines than if you're trying to work around corners or going across the grain. So I always just start by making everything more or less the same shape. Now I'm seaming those long strips together to make a larger piece of fabric, and I'm doing this slightly offset. So the top piece of fabric has about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and the bottom bit of fabric has more like 5/8 of an inch of seam allowance. And that's because we're going to join them together with flat felled seams. Now that the seam's sewn, you can do the flat felling part, which is where you fold the larger seam allowance down over the smaller one, which is incredibly fiddly at the best of times, let alone when you're in a hurry in front of a camera, and then you press that flat against the fabric itself. Then, as you can see me doing here, you top stitch that seam allowance down. That gives you a fully enclosed seam with no raw edges and a really strong join between these two pieces of fabric. You can do these seams a lot neater than I'm doing them here, but as previously mentioned, it was the night before the LARP, and I needed this done in a hurry. Now I've got two larger bits of fabric, I'm just trimming down the bottom one so that it matches the top one in size. I've spotted that the bottom one doesn't quite match. There's a small notch missing out of one corner. I'm going to patch over that because other than that these two pieces are more or less identical, and that's a relatively easy fix, rather than making the whole bag smaller to account for that. So this patch will be just slightly larger than the area that I have to cover, and square, or squarish. Then I'm just folding the edges of this down, and I'm going to top stitch it over that gap in the piece of fabric. Now that's all top stitched in, I'm going to trim away the seam allowance and the excess from the back. Trim down the seam allowance of the patch itself, because then we can fold the rest of it over that raw seam allowance, top stitch it down, and we've got another fully enclosed seam. And yes, I have said seam allowance so many times it no longer sounds like a real word. Now I'm just joining the two pieces of the bag to each other, and I'm doing this by using a French seam. You sew the seam with the wrong sides of the fabric towards each other, trim the seam allowance down to about 1/8 of an inch, fold the pieces back out so it's right sized together as it would be for a normal seam, and now the raw seam allowance is again enclosed within the seam itself. Now I'm just making the bottom of the bag because currently it's just a tube. So I'm sandwiching the body of the bag itself between two strips of linen, one blue and one red, because I ran out of the blue. When I fold them both out, again the raw seam allowance will be enclosed between them. Because this is a bag and it's going to have a lot of wear and tear and things knocking around inside it, I didn't want anything fraying or otherwise getting in the way. This is possibly the one time in my life that I am fully finishing my seams instead of just leaving them as they are and hoping for the best. Now I'm closing up the other side of the bag, again with a French seam. but I'm not sewing all the way down to the strips that I've added for the base. Now we're finishing the top of the bag. So I've attached a strip of ribbon to the raw edge, folding that down onto the inside of the bag, and I'm top stitching along both sides of that ribbon. This is going to finish the top edge really nicely, but it's also creating a channel that I can run a cord down, and it will mean that this bag is now a drawstring bag. Then I decided that I didn't really like how the bag was looking the way it was, and stuck a whole bunch of lace on it, because when in doubt, solve your problems with lace. Then my memory card ran out and I kept sewing because I was running out of time. So I created the bottom of the bag by gathering up the base and the lining of the base separately and then tacking a piece of lace over the whole. This is pretty resilient and held up really well to repeated use, so definitely a technique I'd use again. And then here is the finished bag. As you can see, I kept adding lace until I was happy with it. The base has a really nice look and feel to it. It's relatively sturdy without being stiff, and the loops of the ribbon hang over my wrist quite nicely. Hello friends, this is Editing Ash. I hope you've enjoyed this video, even though it was kind of thrown together at the last minute. I have an announcement to make, so I have started a Ko-fi page, or Ko-fi, or whatever we're calling that now. Anyway, Ko-fi is a platform which lets you make a one-off donation to support someone's work. In this case, me making videos. Obviously this is entirely optional, but if you feel like you enjoy the videos and want to support me in making more of them, I've got really ambitious plans for the channel, and aside from anything else I could really do with an SD card that can take more than 20 minutes of footage on it. So the link for that will be in the description, and if you could check it out, that would be amazing. I will see you in the next video.